This is a vital decision for the future of our country, and I believe we should also be clear that it is a final decision. An idea has been put forward that if the country votes to leave, we could have a second renegotiation and perhaps another referendum. Such an approach also ignores more profound points about democracy, diplomacy and legality. This is a straight democratic decision, staying in or leaving, and no government can ignore that. Having a second renegotiation followed by a second referendum is not on the ballot paper.
Whatever decision we take, leave or remain on June the 23rd, the one thing that's clear to me is that if we in the future have confidence in ourselves, then there is no limit to what we can achieve. And I think that the depressing litany of projections about World War III and global Brexit recession that we hear from the Remain side is not the sort of approach that we should take into the future. Whereas on our side, in the Leave campaign, what we believe in is unlocking the potential of the British people.
Let's move
all
on.
say the same thing
about
the economic...
Your scaremongering does not stop at the economy, does it? What comes first, World War III or the global Brexit recession?
It's worth stopping for a second to understand why coming out of the single market is so... I'm genuinely worried about Britain leaving the single market.
I've heard you this evening, and let me make a suggestion, that you failed to hit that migration target. You failed to get a deal that would allow you to meet this migration target. You failed to, in your party management too. So you've reached for a classic Cameron fear campaign. It worked in the Scottish referendum, it worked in the general election campaign when you used the Scots to scare the English. And you're trying it again, but this time, it's not working.
The British public would be voting, if we leave, would be to leave the EU and leave the single market.
Should we come out the single market?
I think that is almost certainly would be the case, yes.
Do you want us to stay inside the single market, yes or no?
No, we should be outside the single market.
I had Michael Gove in that chair, and I said, after Brexit, will we be in the European single market, yes or no? And he said, no.
And he was right.
So we won't be in the European single market.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'd be out of the single market. That's the reality. Britain would be quitting the single market.
We do not need to be in the single market. So what we do not need that.
Do not believe them when they tell you tonight that the single market is good for Britain, that we need to be part of this club to access the single market.
The Leave campaign has admitted they would take us out of the single market.
You've said you'd come out of the single market.
I'm just suggesting that you're distorting. Let's see what Nigel Farage said. This is what you had Mr. Farage saying.
On D+1, we'll find ourselves part of the European Economic Area and with a free trade deal.
And this is what he then went on to say in that same clip that you didn't run.
There is absolutely nothing to fear in terms of trade from leaving the European Union, because on D+1 we'll find ourselves part of the European Economic Area and with a free trade deal. And we should use our membership of the EEA as a holding position from which we can negotiate as the European Union's biggest export market in the world as good a deal. My goodness me, if Switzerland can have one, we can have an even better one.
So there again, he says not that we should stay in the single market as a member, but that we stay in the EEA as a transition until we negotiate something. I mean, the whole clip is online. How did you think you would get away with this distortion?
For many years, Jeremy Corbyn had public doubts about the EU.
We have a European bureaucracy totally unaccountable to anybody. Powers have gone from national parliaments, they haven't gone to the European Parliament, they've gone to the Commission and to some extent to the Council of Ministers. These are quite serious matters.
I'm concerned about the way the European Union is increasingly operating like a free market across Europe, tearing up the social chapter, damaging working class and workers' interests across Europe, hiding tax evasion in Luxembourg and other places, and secretly negotiating a transatlantic... Can I finish? Yeah. Secretly negotiating a transatlantic trade and investment partnership. I think we as a party need to be making strong demands of defending and expanding the social chapter, defending and expanding workers' rights across Europe, and chasing down these approved tax havens that exist by the European Union all across Europe, and asking some serious questions about the way they've treated the people of Greece and other countries by their imposition of austerity measures on them.
Okay.
Well, at 20 minutes to 5, we can now say the decision taken in 1975 by this country to join the common market has been reversed by this referendum to leave the EU. We are absolutely clear now that there is no way that the Remain side can win. It looks
Watch and listen carefully. This is history in the making.
The British people have spoken, and the answer is we're out.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? Changed the face of Europe! And these were the celebrations just moments before the BBC called the result.
This will be a victory for real people, a victory for ordinary people, a victory for decent people. The sun has risen on an independent, united kingdom. And just look at it, even the weather's improved. It's a victory for ordinary people, decent people. It's a victory against the big merchant banks, against the big businesses, and against big politics. And I'm proud of everybody that had the courage, in the face of all the threats, everything they were told, they had the guts to stand up and do the right thing.
There's no hiding the fact that we wanted a different outcome of yesterday's referendum. I am fully aware of how serious or even dramatic this moment is politically, and there's no way of predicting all the political consequences of this event, especially for the UK.
The will of the British people is an instruction that must be delivered. It was not a decision that was taken lightly, not least because so many things were said by so many different organisations about the significance of this decision. But I do not think it would be right for me to try to be the captain that steers our country to its next destination. This is not a decision I've taken lightly, but I do believe it's in the national interest to have a period of stability and then the new leadership required.
We have a clear position, and we voted to leave the European Union. Staying inside the single market would be a betrayal of that vote. It means that we would still be subject to the free movement of people, we would still be subject to the European Court of Justice and paying a large amount of money into the European budget. I think people would view that as very much staying inside the European Union, so I think we need to be clear about that.
The BBC has admitted to receiving more than £2 million of EU funding over the past 3 years, with critics highlighting the inappropriate timing in the lead-up to the EU referendum.
The UK's International Trade Secretary, Liam Fox, has accused the BBC of willfully ignoring positive news on the Brexit process. The claim came in a letter to the broadcaster's Director General. However, he has already voiced his concerns before.
Every time I open a newspaper or listen to the radio or TV, the story is done very negatively. It's going to be impossible for us to do these trade deals. Does he feel that it's both wrong and undermines the work that he's doing?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it does appear that some elements of our media would rather see Britain fail than see Brexit succeed. I cannot recall a single time in recent times when I have seen good economic news that the BBC didn't describe as despite Brexit.
The BBC isn't reporting the positive economic data relating to Britain's decision to leave the European Union.
I mean, the night of the Clacton by-election, there was a question time on, a live question time from Clacton. So Douglas Carswell had won the by-election by a majority of 35%. You know, he got nearly 2/3 of the votes. Question time managed to produce an audience of 200 in the hall there who were deeply hostile to UKIP.
It's a difference. What it is for UK, what is that UK does best? What is the trade that will benefit both sides? It could be Hinkley Point, it could be high-speed train, it could be education export, could be technology, and it doesn't really matter. It is, from China's point of view, China's looking at UK as a singular economy. There isn't a distinction whether this is part of a European economy. UK is its own, and that's what China wants to trade with you.
And we recognise that as Britain moves to completing its exit from the European Union, we stand ready to enter into a free trade agreement with the United Kingdom as soon as the UK is able to do so.
This headline today is just something else. Cancer patients
in Brexit scare. What Osborne's telling us is if we leave the European Union and Euratom, etc., we won't be able to get some of the isotopes we need to treat cancer patients in this country. It is part of this thinking that the world begins and ends with Europe. Do you know what, George? They manufacture this stuff all over the world. And if our next door neighbours wouldn't sell us life-saving drugs because we've left their political union, then do you know what? We should have left it 30 years ago, if that's what vile people they are.
Run our own policies,
yes,
have our own country.
As we have
and
done.
by the way, reach out to a bigger world than Europe, because that's
Global Britain.
that is what is so
Britain.
exciting about
Is
Brexit.
this global Britain?
There are over 20 countries are now
Is the
queuing
first
up
step of a global Britain to come out of the biggest market in the world? How does that make any sense?
Because we're having to pay a net £10 million a year to be part of a market that over-regulates our industries and makes us less competitive.
Nigel, who's in control?
Why are you so miserable? We're getting back our independence. It's great.
I am not miserable. I am genuinely worried.
We're a great country, aren't we?
And you have helped bring about an act of economic and political suicide, and that we are going to go into rapid decline.
How is it political suicide
and more
to make your own laws in your own country?
Are we going to stay in the customs union or not?
No.
£1 million. Are we going to get
You told us it was a common market, it was about trade, and
1974?
not to worry our little heads. 50 years of lies. 50 years of lies.
50 years
and
of
we've now redressed the balance. And we're now getting our independence back, our pride back, our self-respect back. We're going to be a proper nation.
Sorry, we're going to be a laughing.
People here don't understand. They're too wealthy. They don't get what open door mass immigration as a result of EU membership has done to people's wages, to people's availability of getting GP appointments or their kids into local schools. This was the issue ultimately that won this election. The EU's failing, the EU's dying. I hope we've knocked the first brick out of the wall. I hope this is the first step towards a Europe of sovereign nation states, trading together, neighbours together, friends together, but without flags, anthems, or useless old unelected presidents.
Would be to leave the EU and leave the single market.
We'd be out of the single market. That's the reality. Britain would be quitting the single market.
The Leave campaign has admitted they would take us out of the single market.